All right. Good evening. Before we get started here, I'd like to have our invocation and ask Chaplain Remco Brummett to come up and give us our invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I invite everyone here to join me in this invocation, if you are inclined. Our Father in heaven, we want to pause tonight before this meeting, first of all, to give you thanks and to confess that we owe you way more thanks than we often realize or are willing to accomplish. And so we're here to say that yours is the strength and the power and the honor and glory and the majesty for all that you do for us and all that you mean for us and your presence in our lives. And once again we pray that you would give the City Council and the Mayor and all the public servants gathered here tonight wisdom beyond human understanding and perspective beyond human vision to administer the affairs of this city. And we pause and pray for protection on those that serve the city out on the streets, the police departments, the fire department, the public works employees, especially in the light of so many recent deaths in police departments and among public servants in the country in the past month. We ask urgently for your protection on our departments, as well as of those in the cities around us. And last but not least, we pray for the citizens of the city that we serve, for their safety and for well-being, that you would keep your restraining hand upon crime, and that you would incline the hearts of our citizens in love toward you and toward one another. And with respect to all religious beliefs, I make this prayer in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, February 7th, 2011 to order. Will the City Clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will be happy to call roll for the February 7th, 2011 regular meeting. However, I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Additionally, those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment, either during the public hearing or during the call for public comment, you're required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on the item. There is no public comment for consent agenda items or items under first presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the City Clerk's staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization if applicable. When you hear the bell, you have 30 seconds to complete your remarks. The City Council may allow public comment on either an agenda item or general public comment from a representative of such an organized group or association, provided, however, that such an individual shall file a notarized affidavit that they have the authority to speak on behalf of said organization on a form provided by the City Clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you will expect to receive yourself. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman.
Here.
Councilmember Julie Zonner Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Bill Luss.
Here.
Councilmember Bert Hewitt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Longoria.
Here.
And Councilmember Alan Tart.
I believe Councilmember Tart is away on business.
Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, will the City Clerk please sound the first item?
Next item is approval of a meeting agenda. This is agenda item number 11-019.
Okay, do we have any other items by staff to be considered? Council? Nope. Okay, do I have a motion and a second?
Make a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hewitt, a second by Councilmember Bailey. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Next item is public comment. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor and the city council and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. There's no discussion on items on the consent agenda or first presentation from the public or from council. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please step forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You'll have 5 minutes for remarks. Ms. City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay. Move on to the consent agenda. City Clerk, please sound the items.
First item is approval of the January 19th, 2011 regular minutes. This is agenda item number 11020. Next is consent to the request for assignment of contract and task order from Street Smarts, Inc. to Stantec Consulting Services, Inc. Agenda item number 11021. Our third item is approval of a Parks and Recreation event license agreement between the City of Milton and I-9 Sports, Forsyth, North Fulton, to offer a co-ed youth soccer program for ages 4 through 12 at Cogburn Woods Elementary School. Agenda item number 11022. Our fourth item, approval of a Parks and Recreation event license agreement between the City of Milton and I-9 Sports, Forsyth, North Fulton, to offer a co-ed youth flag football program for ages 4 through 12 at Birmingham Falls Elementary School. This is agenda item number 11023. Our fifth item is approval of a Parks and Recreation Independent Contractor Services Agreement between the City of Milton and Jessica Miller to offer a junior jazzercise program. Agenda item number 11024. Our final consent agenda item is approval of a temporary access license agreement between the City of Milton and Wellness Centers of America, Inc. for the junior jazzercise program. This is agenda item number 11025.
Okay. Do we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda as prepared by staff.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Lusk and a second by Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Move on to reports and presentations. Will City Clerk please sound those items?
Presentation of Rural Metro Ambulance, RMA, Emergency Medical Transport Fees. This is agenda item number 11026 and is being presented by Reg James, Division General Manager for Rural Metro Ambulance.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Reg James. I'm the Division General Manager for Rural Metro in the state of Georgia. As part of a process to consider the economic realities of the EMS system in this city and as well as the neighboring cities that we are contracting together with, we are seeking your approval to increase our user fees by roughly 20% as the gross amount that we charge. I've got a brief presentation that I can go through for your benefit if you're not familiar with how the system works and the economic realities as it is now. The agenda is going to have a basic overview of the system, the economics concerning the system. Thank you. Okay, thanks. What's changing now since the contract was put into place on July 1st, 2008? A comparison of the area rates and then some options and alternatives as we see them, just to be thorough and objective in terms of the options available to the city. Sorry, we're having a little technical. Sorry. All right, quick overview of the system as it exists today. The contract began in July 2008. The data that the contract was developed on was 2007 data. Right now, we're part of a multi-jurisdictional contract the City of Milton participates in with Alpharetta, Johns Creek, Roswell, and Alpharetta, and of course Mountain Park is also part of that as part of Roswell. At peak load, which means the busiest time of the day, we have 6 advanced life support ambulances operating within the multi-party area. We operate with over 100 EMTs and paramedics and ancillary support staff. Overall in Georgia, we have about 545 EMTs and paramedics in metropolitan Atlanta, where we provide 911 in South Fulton, Sandy Springs, and DeKalb County as well. We've enjoyed a strong working relationship with officials within the city of Milton, and we appreciate the opportunity to continue to serve the citizens. We maintain open and effective communication, and we share common visions and goals for the system. So the system is working as designed, and we're proud of that, and we appreciate working with Chief Edgar and his staff, which makes our jobs quite easy as we work with them. Just a quick interesting fact slide shows the historical call demand since January of 2010 compared to the transports for the 911 emergency ambulance calls for the city of Milton. And if you'll notice the box, it just shows a quick snapshot of the daily activity. So we respond to about 3 calls a day on average. Some days it's none, some days it's 6. Transport on average of 2.3, and we have about a 75% transport rate for the calls that do come through the system. This chart shows a comparison of call demand throughout the entire multi-city zone. And as you can see, Milton represents about 8.5% of the entire call volume of this area in this market. System economics. In Georgia, 911 ambulances are evaluated under 3 criteria: economy, efficiency, and public welfare. By participating in a multi-jurisdictional contract and sharing the economies of a larger system, this city is benefiting from being part of a larger system without having to pay for all the resources it would require to cover the territory and landmass that you have here. And that goes to the heart of economy and efficiency, and it's a very progressive system, and we're proud of it. Economy and efficiency is realized through peak load staffing, which means during the middle of the night when we don't need as many ambulances, we don't have as many ambulances, so we don't have the payroll associated with having idle units. We also do dynamic posting, which means that we look at historical call demand trends and pre-position our ambulances in the areas of high likelihood of getting an ambulance at different times of the day and different days of the week. That allows us to handle more volume more efficiently with fewer resources than a typical static system. We also maintain high levels of clinical quality. We obtain our medical direction from the Emory Clinic, which is board-certified emergency medicine physicians out of Emory, and we share those resources with multiple cities within the jurisdiction. So we're all working from the same set of medical protocols and clinical training, which makes transfer of patients from first responders to the ambulance corps to the emergency department seamless. The prominent costs for the ambulance service are what you would predict. Payroll is the number one cost, and then vehicle expenses related to maintenance and fuel. The revenue realities concerning the economics of an EMS system involve medical billing. As our services are medical in nature, we participate in medical billing. And there's 4 basic payers for any particular case. In this city and throughout the North Fulton area, the payer mix breaks down as listed on this chart. Of the cases that we handle, about 42% or almost 43% have Medicare. About 5.8% are Medicaid. Commercial insurance covers about 21.5% of our cases, and private pay is 23%. We'll talk a little bit more about what those different payers actually mean, but it's interesting to note the payer mix. So what's changing now since the contract was started? Operating costs are rising. We're just like everyone else. We're feeling the brunt of that. Fuel expenses, for one, is a significant increase for us, and we put a lot of mileage on the trucks. We drive a lot of miles. We use a lot of fuel. Our payroll is up about 20% in the last 12 months, and that's basically due to health insurance costs for our employees. And we do have some merit increase expenses there that go along with the normal increase in cost. Collection rates are down overall 9%. And what we're seeing is a shift in our payer mix. When we have an increase of about 11% in private pay, which in our business is essentially bad debt. There's basically going to be no payments on those. And we have a reduction of 2.7% in third-party payer, which are the commercial insurance. That means to us is we're picking up more people that no longer have insurance, that probably had insurance in their jobs and lost their jobs, and now are using 911 ambulance services as their primary access to health care. Since only 2.7% of the folks, the payer mix, have lost their insurance, but 11% increase in bad debt, more and more people are electing to use 911 to gain access to the system because they feel like they won't be turned away from the emergency department, or they're waiting longer and getting sicker, and then they have to use the services of the emergency department. It's a pretty typical cycle that occurs throughout the nation. We're also seeing a decrease in Medicaid enrollment of 3.5%. Can't explain that other than either there's a shift in the payer mix demographically in the city, or Medicaid's making it harder to sign up on their rolls, which is also something we've seen before. And the same is true for Medicare, a 4.1% decrease in the Medicare coverage for this demographic. So overall, the economic realities are our costs are rising exponentially, and our revenues based on collection rates are dropping. This chart shows you just a quick snapshot of those changes in those various payer mixes. What I'm asking for is a small increase in my base rates, which is the least impactful way of trying to generate more revenue. We're basically transferring a little more cost to the third-party payers or the commercial insurance companies. By charging more, we won't collect any more from Medicare than they already pay, because they only pay based on an 80% of approved rates for the condition, and Medicaid is likewise. People that don't have insurance or private pay, typically we see about a 1 to 2% collection rate in that category, so it's really not going to impact them. It's going to impact the insurance companies, and that's where we're trying to maximize our revenue and offset some of these elevating costs. If you look at the chart, on the left side is our current rates at $635 for an advanced life support base rate. The middle is Grady at $1,628. And the right side, and they're a 911 ambulance service, so they're a comparable ambulance service for us. They have the same expense and cost required to have the infrastructure in place to be a 911 ambulance provider. The far right category is a local private ambulance provider, Central Ambulance. They're not a 911 ambulance service. They don't have the same infrastructure requirements that a 911 ambulance service has, but their base rates are quite significantly higher than ours. And it's notable that their base rate there at $895 is for the basic life support base rate. It's not as expensive as the advanced life support base rate that we apply. So what I'm asking for, my 20% increase, is about a $762 base rate, in hopes that we see a little bit more revenue come through the bottom line and help offset our costs. Transport mileage, it's the same story. We charge by mile, by loaded mile for transport. It's approved and authorized through Medicare, Medicaid, and third-party insurance do pay it. And again, we're lower than Grady, but we're slightly higher than the BLS base rate that we were able to obtain from Central. Just a quick note about revenue, billing, gross revenues and net revenues in ambulance business when you have medical billing. Hypothetically, I might bill an ambulance call for $100. Medicare may only pay $80 of that $100, or they may pay $40. We have to write off the balance when it comes to taking assignment from Medicare. So because we're adding a 20% increase in base rates does not translate to a 20% increase in net collections, because it has to get washed through the filters of discounts for Medicare, Medicaid, third-party insurance, as well as the bad debt or the private pay. The options, we believe that amending the rate schedule is the least disruptive and the simplest way to try to offset some of the additional costs that we have with additional revenue. But it is possible to increase public support through the subsidy, which we don't advocate. We could reduce the number of ambulance unit hours, which would lower my cost, which we also don't advocate. Do some combination of those two, or keep the agreement in its current form and ask us to ride it out. But over time, it'll cost somebody somewhere, because our costs are skyrocketing and our reimbursements decreasing. So we were hopeful that by getting the support of all the cities to increase our rates, the commercial insurance companies would help offset that deficit. In summary, we're proud of the fact that the system's working. It's a true public-private model that works. It creates efficiency and economy in a system. The service delivery, the confidence, and the relationships are strong. Clinical quality is high. Unfortunately, the economics are changing, but that's happening all over the country. There's been a couple of articles recently in the paper as local as Gwinnett County, and then nationally, the USA Today in the last 3 weeks has had an article on a similar matter, where ambulance services are having to increase their rates to cover costs. Our rates are currently low compared to others, and even with our proposed increase, we're still below some of our comparable competitors. And again, the fee increase primarily affects insurance companies. And I'd be happy to address any questions you might have.
Okay, do we have any questions? So you did, Bill? Okay, Bill?
Mr. James,
Yes, sir.
on your one handout here, of what is changing, one of the key bullet points is decreasing collection rates, and you name this throughout your report. How does our collection rate up here in Milton or Johns Creek compare with, say, Roswell or Alpharetta?
I don't have the specific numbers with me, but your collection rates as a percentage of the whole are much better than Roswell. Johns Creek and Milton have the highest collection rates overall. They've been in the 60% range. Overall, the system's collecting about 48%, whereas your two cities are in the 60% range.
60%.
Yes, sir. There is an offsetting note there, though. However, when you look at your transports of a little over 2 per day as compared to Roswell, Alpharetta that have 30, the revenue is significantly higher in those cities than here, even though your collection rates are higher.
We've got a question, maybe staff too. If you raise your rates, and you mentioned that mainly will affect the insurance companies that's paying this, do we as a city, will it affect our subsidizing at all, or our costs that we pay, or as a premium to have better service? Would that affect that at all?
It does not affect the subsidy at all.
Okay, so basically, the cost will be borne by the insurance companies and some private pay. As
Well, we
you
hope
say,
to
you
see
don't have
some
a-
increase in private pay. Yes, sir.
in the private pay. Okay. Karen?
It's my understanding that in the subsidy is split evenly among the
Yes, ma'am.
cities. And I know that that's not really a topic we're discussing here tonight, but if we have such a lower percentage, I know we cover a greater area. What is the response time within the city of Milton as compared to response time in other cities? And I'm just wondering, I know the area's bigger, and I know you have to have more people up here per person, more units per person, just because it takes longer to get to them. But what is our average response time?
Well, we look at your response times under an analysis called fractile, which is a percentage of responses within a certain time frame. We don't look at it by averages. And our contract calls for us to provide 8 minutes or less for certain emergencies 90% of the time, and then there's some higher numbers for lesser emergencies, for the non-emergency cases. We are not meeting a 90% response time in this city. And you asked how it compares to others. We're anywhere from 68 to 85% month to month in this city. The other cities are enjoying a little over 90% for the most part, except for Johns Creek. And Johns Creek is a similar scenario where they're just slightly underneath the 90 percentile threshold. As we talk about response times, it's important to realize, however, you have a fine first responder agency in your fire department with advanced life support paramedics. And a response time for emergencies is important in a couple of scenarios. And your fire department provides that response time for the life-saving endeavors that have to occur within 6 minutes. The ambulance service coming in after that, while we're not compliant with the contract, we don't believe that we've compromised any of the public welfare here. In fact, it's an ongoing dialogue with the MROC group, which is the Emergency Medical Response Oversight Committees, that involves the chiefs and the city administrators, to have dialogue, because our contract between all the cities in rural metro actually contemplates what do we do if one of the cities is out of compliance. And the first step is that we change our dynamic posting plans where we move our ambulances around to see if maybe it's a resource allocation issue, which that's been done over the past 12 months a number of times. And the second step is you either increase the number of resources on the road, or you start talking about changing the technical numbers that are at odds with the reality of the system. And so right now we have open dialogue with the chiefs to decide what do we want to do about the technical non-compliance with the response time criteria.
Because we're paying over $100,000 a year as a subsidy to make sure we get a better response time. And I guess I'm just really wondering if we're getting a better response time, or if we're just helping to subsidize a better response time in some of the other cities, if we're still getting the same response time.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, and not to minimize the answer, but it's a complex scenario, because if your city wanted to have enough ambulances to cover the highest number of ambulance calls that you have on any given day, it might be 4, it might be 5. Sometimes your city has 5 or 6 ambulance calls in the same time during the same day. And to have enough ambulances within the city to cover that peak demand is extraordinarily expensive. Whereas some days you don't have any calls and you don't need any ambulances. And so to pay for having a standalone system in a system where geographically you have a lot of land to cover, but you don't have the density of the population to cover, to offset the expenses through the revenue, it can be a very difficult proposition for a city to do that by itself. So you're paying the same amount of money the other cities are paying, and you're not getting the same technical compliance that they are, I readily admit. But you're benefiting from a larger system that when there's problems, we can add capacity to the system. It doesn't cost you anymore. For example, when the ice storm hit, we doubled the number of resources in North Fulton County. And there's not a lot of organizations that can double their capacity in a couple of hours. And you got that benefit because you're part of a larger system. If you were standalone, I don't know that you would have that same benefit. It's possible, but you might not. The other aspect of that is, like I mentioned before, the revenue side of this. Your city is paying $132,000 and some change a year. So are the others. They're contributing a tremendous amount of revenue to the bottom line as well as compared to your city. So there's another argument to that those guys could pose that says, well, we need to get credit for some of the revenue that we bring to the system. And they would argue that they're paying too much compared to the revenue that they are. So it's a very complex question. It's a very valid question. And it's really the question that led us to forming the MROC committee in 2007 that led to the contracts that came to play today. And I would welcome more dialogue on the subject whenever you feel like it's appropriate, is involved with the fire chiefs and the city administrators. Because I want to answer your questions. I want you to understand and be satisfied with what you have.
And I understand how we need to have, a 90% system-wide, but I would like to see there to be minimum standards within each city also that would need to be met. And I think that that's important. I think we owe that to our citizens. I am very glad that our firefighters are able to fill in during that time and respond to those calls in a timelier basis. But I would like to see minimum standards for each city in addition to the overall average.
I agree with you, and I do want to compliment your city for having that, that insight to put a first responder system in that's prepared to make the difference in the citizens' lives, because it's not everywhere. It's not everywhere we serve, so it's a tremendous thing.
Okay.
Can I follow up just one thing on what Reg said too? I just want us all to stay at we need to stay in the mindset right now of a regional transport system. As soon as we try to figure out how we would staff something to just handle the city of Milton, we start to lose efficiency. So very valid questions, very good points. I just want us all to stay in the mindset, which is the mindset we were all in forming the MROC group and how we initially decided how do you break this subsidy thing up. You know, one of the first things that I heard when we were talking about this number was, well, let's break it up based on the number of transports. And I said, ooh, I like that, because you saw what our piece of the pie was on that sheet. But then there were those that said, you know, the only real reason that we've got to have as many ambulances in the system as we do is because Milton is so darn big with land areas. So rather than worrying about the number of transports, let's break it up by the area of the city. And I said, oh, no, I don't know if I like that as much as I like the number of transport things. So then I'm trying to go back to, then we said, okay, let's make it 2/3 land area, 1/3 number of transports. And then somebody said, well, why not 1/3 land area and 2/3 number of transports? And everything just, for every option there was a subsequent option. I think it was really, really, really impressive that the region came together to be able to stay focused regionally on providing this service, and that was when we just all decided that, rather than trying to figure out this formula that we don't know what makes sense, honestly, let's approach this so that when somebody's in North Fulton, they benefit from a higher level of first response care to the hospital should they need it. Because yes, we have our Milton citizens, but our Milton citizens also travel through Alpharetta and Roswell and Johns Creek and other areas here in North Fulton every day, and so do their families. So I think it's important to start to talk about contract compliance, and the fire chiefs do that, and we do that through MROC. But as we go through these discussions, let's just please keep our mindset still in the regional concept.
Okay. Julie and then Bill.
Thank you, Mayor. When you talk, Mr. James, about collections, just very briefly, I mean, do you do your collection activity internally, or do you outsource that?
We do it internally. Our company is a national corporation. We have a regional billing office in Indianapolis, Indiana.
The only reason I ask that question, I know that a lot of firms are looking at those collection rates and just wondering what alternatives there might be. So I just maybe throw that out as something to consider, is whether or not those collection rates internally could be enhanced, just as one thought. Chris, another question for you. In terms of the time frame of when these agreements, looking at the subsidy and how that is split, what is the current kind of time frame for when we would get back? And I know we speak with our fellow sister cities frequently, but what is the contractual obligation for us to get back and reevaluate that subsidy split?
Well, it would have the opportunity to be evaluated every year as the contract.
Just not required every year.
Just not required. But I can tell you the group that brought that forward, which we're a part of, which is the Emergency Medical Response Oversight Group Committee, I think it was called MROC. They meet on a monthly basis. Generally, I don't think that there's anything at this point that's wrong with the contract that we have. We need to work with this system to see how we can maximize its effectiveness. But generally, the relationship between the cities and the contract is a good one.
It's going well. And I guess my thought process was several tiered. One is that the dialogue is ongoing, that obviously tonight's not the first night that the cities are evaluating the information that Mr. James is bringing forward. But with some of this data, I just wonder, and I, again, have confidence that our city manager, meaning you and our staff, are looking at those options. But with this data of increased or reduced collection rates and increased costs, and the fact that our response times are not contractually what we were hoping, is there something before we have to make a decision that you guys can look at to say, okay, based on this new information, some recommendations are going to come from staff in terms of what you think we might be needing to evaluate?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I said I think so. I know so. And I know that our fire chief is well involved in this. There are some things we are exploring as some opportunities, some things that are being tried in other counties at this point. Yes. So in answer to your question, yes, there will be some stuff brought forward. I don't know that tonight, along with just a presentation on a fee increase, is the right time to roll that out. But we can certainly have either a one-on-one discussion, or we can come forward maybe at the next work session and talk about it in more detail.
And that's just be my suggestion, is that obviously this is very helpful information. I think probably between all of us there's questions, and knowing that staff's looking at this also, if we could at a minimum have it at a work session so we could better understand some of those options. And do we know what sort of a time frame we're looking for in terms of when rural metro needs a decision
A decision on,
on whether or not we would,
Decision
as an
support.
individual city, whether or not we would support changing that fee structure?
you know, I think that's something that we'll have to give them fairly quickly. You know, and frankly, I'm positioned, I guess, tonight to tell you that based on the contract, I don't know that we are in a position that we can officially or should officially object. You know, rural metro has met the criteria in the contract to indicate that they have the ability to raise the fees. But I think it's important that any time, you know, a fee increase is requested, especially when they're citizens that would be the ones paying these fees, I think it's appropriate that at least there be an opportunity that Reg or representatives from rural metro would come and at least explain to you all why the fees are about to be increased. So, you know, we would have the opportunity to, I guess, officially object if we want to. I don't think that's good for the system, and I don't think I'd make that recommendation.
And I'm surely not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that as you look at other options that can help keep the fee structure as positive for our citizens as it can be, is that we continue that dialogue, whether it be collection rates internally for you guys as a firm to evaluate. I know that we as a city have done some things that have been very positive in terms of our collection rates just on, you know, taxes. But it's always a concern, obviously, when we're looking at higher cost to our citizenry. But obviously it matters, and I think your point is well taken, Chris, in terms of it being a regional response that we need to look for, because obviously we do leave the borders of Milton and travel to Roswell and Alpharetta.
Bill?
Yes, sir. It's been a year or so since I've read the contract, and I know you're well within your rights to ask for a rate increase. I don't recall what degree of substantiation or documentation you're to provide in asking for that increase, but you know, some of these, one in particular, 115% increase in vehicle and equipment costs, kind of jumps up and speaks to me. And there are, most of us here have businesses ourselves, and were this to come in front of our businesses on an individual basis, I think we'd have to challenge it. Could you give me some examples of where this massive 115% increase comes in?
Yes, sir. Fuel is one of the big ones. And these costs are global for the system. It's hard to break out just the Milton aspect, so it's all the system units and all the activity that goes on in North Fulton. And we drive a lot with these trucks because we move the trucks around a lot. So not only are they responding to calls and then transporting, but we also reposition constantly. So fuel is a tremendous cost for us, and as the fuel costs have gone up and diesel costs have gone up, that's a big part of it. The other part of it is these were brand new trucks in 2008 when we brought them onto the contract. We got a couple of years on them. They're getting a couple 100,000 miles on them, and the maintenance is just more extensive. We have an aggressive preventative maintenance program, but we're seeing that we have to do more repairs than typical when they were brand new in the first year of their lives. And so with the age and the mileage and the increased cost for fuel and parts, the costs are just rising. And it is startlingly high in the last 12 months.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Chris, how long was the duration of the contract?
It's a year-to-year annual renewal, but was it 10?
It was 10, yes, sir.
And this is the first increase you guys have asked for?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, 20% in a year seems sort of high, but we're saying that that's inside the limits of what the contract provides for?
Yes.
No. Okay, I apologize for not remembering the term that you used.
Yes, sir.
In my language, it would be the service level agreement of 8 minutes
Yes, sir.
response time. You called that something else?
Fractile response time.
Fractile response time. So you're saying you're not meeting that for the city of Milton for a lot of different reasons?
Correct.
What percentage happens to be within that?
Well, it ranges from about 66% to 84%. month to month. It's evaluated on a calendar monthly basis.
And that's part of the data that goes in front of this board that meets every month?
Yes, sir. And I should note also, not that it's an excuse, because I readily say we're not compliant with the technical aspects of the contract, but when we have 3 calls and one of them is late, that's 66% compliance. Late being, it could be 8 minutes and 30 seconds, that's late. It could be 15 or 18 minutes, so that's late. But it doesn't, so we don't have a lot of volume, those percentages move quite quickly.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's statistics when you get right down to
That's
it.
right.
We don't have the benefit of large numbers,
That's
and
right.
therefore,
That's right.
every time you miss, it's a big deal.
Yes, sir.
So, okay, so, oh yeah, you didn't know when the contract would be up for negotiation anyway. All right, thanks.
Okay. Anything else, staff or our chief want to add?
Yeah, I won't take up too much time. I just do want to say that Rural Metro and Mr. James and his staff have been excellent to work with. Their paramedics are the tops, and our staff works well with them. So the system itself works well. It's just the little stuff here that we're dealing with the transports times and, the response times is some of the difficult stuff. And we do meet on those actually twice a month through the AMROC operations meeting as well as the medical committee. So all the chiefs in the north area here meet together, we meet with his staff, and what we try to do is come up with a better way to improve the system and get additional or better response times.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. James.
Thank you very much.
For your time. And I'm going to just leave this up to staff to keep us in the loop of what we need to do and when, and recommendations, and if we need to, bring this up in a work session quick, or however you want to handle that. Okay, no items under first presentation tonight. Let's see, we'll move on to an alcoholic beverage license application public hearing. Will the city clerk please sound this item?
Item is approval of the issuance of an alcohol beverage license to the Club Pub LLC, doing business as Irwoods, located at 12635 Crabapple Road, Suite 310, Milton, Georgia, 30004. The applicant is Robert Forrest, for consumption on premises, wine, malt, beverages, and distilled spirits. Agenda item number 11027, Ms. Stacy Inglis.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to let you know that the applicant has met all of the city's requirements for getting an alcohol beverage license, and staff recommends approval of this license.
Okay. Council have any
Is
questions?
this going into a place that is previously?
Little Lazios there. in
Lassie?
Crab Apple.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
Okay, any questions for Stacy on this? Okay, do we have any public comment on this?
No, sir.
Okay. Close the public hearing, and is there any discussion from council? If not, I'll open it up to a motion in a second.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve agenda item number 11-027, approval of an issuance of an alcohol beverage license to the Club Pub LLC, DBA Irwoods, located at 12635 Crabapple Road, Suite 310, Milton, Georgia.
Second the motion.
Okay, I've got a motion by Councilmember Thurman and a second by Councilmember Bailey. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any items under the zoning agenda or unfinished business, so I'm going to move on to new business. Will the city clerk please sound those items?
This item is resolution of the City of Milton, Georgia to set qualifying fees for municipal elections. This is agenda item number 11028. Mr. Chris Lagerbloom.
Mayor and council, coming into an election year, this resolution is fairly self-explanatory. Election in Milton will be held November the 8th, 2011, for districts 2, 4, and 6. Georgia code allows for 3% of the total gross salary of the office paid in the preceding year as the qualifying fee, and this resolution would establish the qualifying fee of $390 for the election in 2011. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I believe Bert mentioned something about he was hoping it'd be about $10,000.
That would bother
Oh,
me.
no.
Because that would
I
mean
guess they'd have to
that
pay
would
that
be
too.
3% of our
Yeah, they'd have to pay
annual
that too.
salary.
I do have a question, though. Is it appropriate if we are in one of these districts that's running that we vote on this? But it is.
Either you or your challenger has to pay that. Okay, any questions on this? Not, do I have a motion and a second?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve agenda item number 11028, resolution of the City of Milton, Georgia, to set qualifying fees for municipal elections.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Law, second by Councilmember Thurman. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Move on to reports. I just want to, looks like we've got some Milton students here tonight, so welcome you to the City of Milton and a council meeting. I'm sure you're excited to be here.
They picked a good meeting to come to. It's a short agenda.
It is a short agenda tonight, so, okay. Anybody on council have anything they want to report on? Okay, I'll move on to staff and,
I just want to know if they all showed up because the old class I met with, and I said this was going to be a short meeting. The audience size, that's awesome. Some of these students might be students that are going to participate in our mock council. Any of y'all do that?
all right,
Put stuff in? Anybody want to be the mayor?
come on, it's easy.
So that date has been set for March the 16th. Just to bring your attention back to it. That the mock council will happen in this room, March the 16th, 10 o'clock in the morning. It'll end by noon. I'd like you all to put it, as many of you as possible, to put it on your calendars. If you've had the opportunity just to even stop by for a couple minutes, it's going to be a great. It's going to be a great thing. Good morning here at Milton City Hall.
Will you remind that, please?
I will.
You guys, we could let you take our seats tonight just to get a flavor for it.
Well, again, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No, we'll just open up staff.
We published 3 staff reports tonight, as you saw by email, and that was designed, because we had a relatively short meeting, that was designed to free up next Monday night, which we're able to talk about these things since we actually published them on an agenda. So let's work our way through this one. I anticipate the first one's fairly quick. The second one, no clue, and the third one, not sure about that one either. So let's start with. What? So funny about that. Let's start with Cindy. She's got some awesome stuff going on in the Parks and Rec department, and you approved some contracts tonight on the consent agenda. We're about to have youth sports in Milton, which is really cool. So, without further ado, maybe let Cindy do kind of an update on where her department is.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you're aware, a variety of capital projects were identified and approved for fiscal year 11. I'd like to provide you with a brief update on where these projects stand to date. As you may recall, in November, we completed the purchase of 1 acre on the corner of Deerfield Parkway and Webb Road, which was part of fiscal year 11. We used Parks and Recreation capital funds and designated MARTA funds for this purchase. The property was acquired for a price well below market value due to a foreclosure. A site plan has not yet been completed for the development of this property. Regarding Bell Memorial Park improvements, Phase 1 of the drainage project was completed last summer in FY10. Phase 2 of the drainage work will be completed soon as weather issues have prevented completion. An area between fields 3 and 4 have been readdressed since this summer. Heaters and light sensors have been installed in the restrooms and concession stand. The block dugouts at fields 1 and 2 have been replaced with new chain link dugouts. New dugout benches are being ordered and will be installed prior to games beginning. Push-button faucets will be added in the restrooms. The erosion control project along the main parking lot beside Field 1 is being designed along with an additional set of stairs. All projects should be completed by March. These improvements are funded by reinvestment money paid by HYA per the use agreement. Bethwell Community Center, final civil and architectural drawings will be submitted tomorrow. The request for bid is scheduled to be released next Monday, February 14th. Construction should begin by the beginning of April and completed by mid-May. The facility will be open for public use in June by reservation and fee. Camp Bethwell will begin June 6th, and many other programs will be scheduled at Bethwell. Revenue from user fees and programs will offset the cost of the renovation. Intergovernmental agreements. This will include improvements at Cogburn Woods Elementary School, Hopewell Middle School, and Birmingham Falls Elementary School, as we are also exploring other IGAs. IGAs are currently being finalized for these three schools. Improvements at the school in return for priority usage include field irrigation and maintenance and dugouts at Hopewell Middle School. Improvements will be made this summer when school is not in session. The term of the agreements will be 5 years in return for these improvements. Revenues from programs will offset the cost of these improvements. Also, another intergovernmental agreement for the development of 2-acre city park between Crabapple Crossing Elementary School and Northwestern Middle School. The initial site plan was approved a few months ago by the Fulton County Board of Education. I have a meeting on February 17th to finalize details for the agreement with both principals. We hope to begin construction in June, so the park will be completed by August when school begins. The park will be used by the schools during the day, and it will function as a city park before and after school, on weekends, and during the summer. The term of this agreement will be 10 years. Revenues from programs and uses will help offset construction and maintenance costs. We have 3 planning projects coming up soon. A Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Master Plan. This will be the first of our planning projects this year. This will take the assessment plan, pattern book, needs assessment survey, national standards, and other data resources, and combine everything into one comprehensive package as a future implementation plan. This document should carry us forward for the next 10 to 15 years. Also included is the Birmingham Park Master Plan. This planning project will identify and define the future development of Birmingham Park. While Fulton County created a master plan for the park in 2005, Milton will revisit the initial research and concept for the park and apply current and future needs for a new master plan. Phases for development and cost estimates will also be established. The Milton Trail Plan update, we will revisit the existing Milton Trail Plan and make necessary updates and modification for future implementation. Phasing of implementation and cost estimates will be revisited. These 3 planning projects will most likely be packaged for more competitive pricing. Firms can bid on all 3 projects or just one. The request for bids should go out by the end of February. All 3 planning projects should be completed this spring and summer. Phase 1 of trail plan implementation. Once the trail plan is updated, new cost estimates are available, and phasing established, we'll begin to implement Phase 1 this summer or fall. Park signage program. A revised park entrance sign will be identified, and existing and new signs will be updated so that all entrance signs look the same and can easily be identified as Milton property. In addition to entrance signs, new directional signs will be added around the city to guide residents and visitors to these sites. Crabapple Community Center. Money has been set aside for some improvements here. However, a final plan has not been identified yet. Information is still being collected and evaluated about potential uses of this property. And land acquisition. While I have received many calls and emails regarding potential park property, specific land has not been identified for purchase to date. I'll continue to assess various tracts of land around Milton that can meet our needs. I am still waiting to hear back from 2 landowners who hope to donate their land for park use. This summarizes where we are for FY11 capital projects. I'm happy to address any of your questions before moving on to programs.
Okay. Before I open up questions, I just want to say thank you to Cindy. I know since she's been on board, she's been working very hard, and it's exciting to see some of these things start to come to fruition, at least on paper now, and as we get to move forward. So, parks and recreation is one of those good things that everybody's excited about. I thank Scott for being here tonight. I know, we've been very successful, I believe, with HYA and our relationship there, and this is exciting as we move forward. So I want to thank everybody involved. But anyways, I'll open it up to questions for Cindy. Julie?
Thank you, Mayor, and Cindy, thank you. We appreciate that update. I think 2 quick questions. One is just with regard to the signage, and I'm assuming this is the case, but will that signage, when you guys have some drafts from the committee, will that be going to the design review board to get their input?
Yes, we have some guides that were part of the pattern book, but once we get into actually designing the final concept, yes, it will be something we would bring before the DRB.
Terrific, thank you. And on the master plan initiatives, I know you talked about the Birmingham Park, the trail plan, and what was the third component?
The comprehensive master plan?
The master plan for everything. When you mentioned the dates, I just want to make sure that I got those correct. So that this was going to go out to bid end of February, and when did you expect that to receive the bids back, and then when would the process begin?
Because we're packaging these projects, it would most likely require a longer bid review process to collect the bids and review the bids. We're hoping that they will be conducted in order that I presented them, the comprehensive master plan, the Birmingham Park master plan, and then the trail plan update. But we're thinking if we package them into one request for bid, firms would have the option of bidding on one or more or all, and the pricing we could get could be more competitive, and it may be a more simplistic process if we end up with one firm working on all three projects instead of three different firms working on each one. So.
And I'm sorry, just put the date, when you said end of spring, you meant to get the bids back, not to have the process completed.
Correct. The
I just
bids
wanted to
would
confirm
go
those
out, sorry, the bids
Okay.
I hope to have out by the end of February, beginning of
Yes.
March. And then the completion of all three planning projects should be completed by the end of this summer.
So the completion of all three plans themselves. And just because I know it's going to be something that people are very interested in, is that as soon as we start to have a sense of dates for, I'm assuming there'll be a lot of community meetings, and knowing that the public obviously travels a bunch during the summer, just two thoughts is that, one, the sooner we can give indications to when the public would need to come to various community meetings would be important. And the other would be that if, rather than to necessarily complete it by the end of summer, is to ensure that we at least have some community meetings when citizenry is in town and not on summer vacation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Karen, do you have anything? Do you have any questions? Again, just want to say how excited I think we all are. So thank you, Cindy.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and move on into programs.
Okay.
This will be real quick. As you know, a couple of these were already on the agenda for tonight. Programs as they exist right now, of course, we have our agreement with the Hopewell Youth Association to provide youth baseball at Bell Memorial Park. We also have an agreement in place for our fitness camps program, which is continuing to grow with Core Physique. This spring, as stated on the agenda tonight, we will be offering a junior jazzercise program through an independent contractor instructor for ages 4 to 9. We will also offer co-ed youth flag football and co-ed youth soccer through I-9 Sports for ages 4 to 12. This summer, we'll have Camp Bethwell for ages 6 to 12 with a maximum of 30 kids. It will be held at the Bethwell Community Center. We will also offer Camp Joyful Souls, which is for ages 12 to 18 in conjunction with Camp Happy Hearts offered by the City of Alpharetta. Alpharetta's been very helpful to help us get this program started, and we are dually exploring grant funding and sponsorships to help this program. Fall of 2011, we will continue programs that we start this spring. We will also be introducing youth floorball hockey, which is a brand new sport offered through the Atlanta Thrashers and I-9 Sports. We're exploring that program right now. Also working on partnerships for lacrosse, actively pursuing a partnership with girls lacrosse right now, and we hope to pursue partnerships for boys lacrosse very soon. We'll also introduce a preschool age program for ages 3 to 5. We'll plan to introduce a running club, and we plan to offer additional after-school activities. In winter 2012, we plan to offer basketball. And in addition to these programs identified with specific start times and seasons, we are actively discussing partnerships with various groups for softball, football, soccer, as well as various classes and activities. With regards to special events, we plan to continue all events held last year and add others, as well as including, for the first time this summer, a summer concert series. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Any questions on our programs? Bill?
Do all these programs and the implementation of them fall within our recreation budget?
Yes, they do. The two camps that we'll be offering this summer will be staff-driven. We have set aside money in the general fund for camp counselors to run both of those camp programs. One will be offered at Cogburn Woods Elementary, and the other will be offered at the Bethwell Community Center. Most of these programs, because they're partnerships, will be bringing in revenue to offset any expenses we may have for maintaining the school facilities and such. So.
Thank you.
Julie?
Again, just thank you. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of folks that are very excited about the programs. And knowing that folks are obviously starting to plan ahead for their summer, especially with young children, and some of this may have already been put out on the website, and I just didn't realize it. As an example, the June 6th camp, is that information already out?
We have information on the website about it, but we'll be starting registration most likely March 1st.
Okay, terrific.
Yes.
And again, I'm sure you guys are doing this, but just from a communication standpoint, I know that, Jason, you'll have that obviously in as many different venues as possible. If you haven't already planned to do this, but hopefully that could also be communicated through the schools themselves.
Yes.
I know that folks are out looking for those camps, and the more they can keep them here, I think that they'd prefer to. And will the June 6th, is that a whole summer? Is it weekly programs?
It's 8
weekly
weeks.
camps?
You can sign up for all 8 weeks or 1
or
week, 2
5?
weeks. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Jason. Can you please state your name and address for the record?
All the schools, all their PTAs and administration are added into our mailing list, so they get everything we get.
Great.
Send
We
out.
can just encourage them to, in turn, hopefully send them out. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Again, thank you, Cindy, for all your hard work. We're excited. Okay. We ready for Carter, or do we?
Yes, sir, we are. Discussion of revision to road abandonment law and Milton's road privatization policy. Mr. Carter.
I'll start out a little bit. I'm going to give it to Ken to kind of go over the changes to the state law in regards to road abandonment and privatization. We had a discussion several months ago about changes that came through, and just wanted to circle back around and touch base with you on that revision, as well as a couple of questions that came up at that previous session.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you may recall that in the 2009-2010 legislative session, the General Assembly changed the statute pertaining to municipal road abandonment. That is the process by which governments, cities in particular, are able to take a road out of your city roadway or collector system and essentially privatize it. Historically, the statute had provided that in order to be able to take a roadway out of the city system, there had to be some fairly discreet and I thought somewhat onerous findings made by the city government, particularly a finding that the roadway had ceased to be used for any meaningful public purpose to the extent that the road was no longer used at all. Now, the rule had some case law interpretation as well. There were some instances where the city council could have made a determination that the road was, even if it had some nominal traffic usage, was a magnet for criminal activity, or was so dangerous as to basically warrant abandonment. But the typical standard still was that usage had to be almost reduced to nothing. Now that's changed, and I think I have issued to the council a memorandum on this. I'm fairly confident that I have rolled out what I think the change means, but I think it's significant. The language of the statute now provides that abandonment can occur when there is a discontinuation of the road being used by the public to the extent that no substantial public purpose is served by it. That's the language we know and have looked at before. But now it contains additional language, or that its removal from the municipal street system is otherwise in the best public interest. Okay, well that's altogether, in my opinion, different standard. You as the city council, subject to some limitations, get to determine what is in fact in the best interest of the city. That's why you were elected, and that is within the scope of your legislative and police power discretion. And so really the burden now, the way I view it, has almost flipped. Rather than an individual being able to challenge a decision by the council and the council having to demonstrate that there was no substantial purpose of the road, I think that the burden's flipped now. Now, if the council makes a determination to abandon based upon the fact that you believe that the public interest is served by that abandonment, now I think a party wishing to challenge that would have to show that you abused your discretion in making that determination, which is an altogether different burden, and I think puts the ball squarely in the city's camp and subject to basically you all acting in an arbitrary and capricious way, you can abandon the road now. So the law is substantially different than it was when we last revisited this issue in any meaningful way. And that, of course, begs the question. Now, remember, there's two elements of this whole abandonment process. One was the statute, and then one was your own privatization policy, which Milton has one, and the Milton privatization policy requires 100% sort of buy-in by affected stakeholders. And, of course, we debated this ad infinitum some years ago, what that meant. But in light of this statute change, if the council wanted to, you could revisit that policy. You don't have to, but if you wanted to, you could. And we talked about the irony of it, because some of you had asked quite appropriately, well, if the statute used to say you have to make this finding of no substantial public purpose, then how could you have 100% buy-in and basically get around that? And I think I was very candid with you. That was sort of universally embraced. If you've got 100% buy-in, who is left to object? Which was why I think the privatization policy was written that way. Now the statute gives you more flexibility. You have more flexibility in your policy. That's the bottom line. Carter?
One of the questions that had come up at that previous meeting was what do the surrounding jurisdictions do with regard to the percent approval in making application for the abandonment of a road? As you see here from the ones that we've looked at, which would be our surrounding cities, Johns Creek, Sandy Springs, Roswell, Fulton County, and then Lee County is one that we found just as published. They all require 100% approval. Alpharetta requires that all property owners submit the application, which I think could be inferred to also mean that 100% of the property owners would submit for that. For Johns Creek and Sandy Springs, one of the other components they have in their ordinance that is not in our ordinance is the type of street that can be abandoned. And they're specific in that a street that collects or connects two collector-type streets is not eligible for abandonment under their policy. Fulton County has the same standard on theirs. And so their policies really target or look more towards those small cul-de-sac type streets, small local streets with probably limited traffic volumes on it under their standards. Sandy Springs also has a provision in theirs that allows a homeowners association to act on behalf of a subdivision when making application for privatization or abandonment of that road. Our ordinance currently specifically prohibits a homeowners association from making those determinations and requires 100% of the property owners to be in concurrence with any application for privatization or abandonment of that right-of-way. And so tonight we just kind of wanted to circle back around with you from that previous discussion, language that had changed in the state law, as well as just kind of circle back to the question about whether or not the surrounding jurisdictions required 100%. And for those that we looked at, they do require that. So I guess if there's any questions regarding that, whether or not we want to move forward with any particular changes, any comments on that, I'd be happy to.
Are you looking for input from us then on what we would think?
I think some input on whether or not we'd want to move forward, further evaluation on the ordinance, and whether or not we want to bring forth any recommended changes to that ordinance.
Okay.
Personally, I don't believe 100% approval is a realistic standard unless you really don't want anyone to come forth with it or only want roads that have 2 to 3 homeowners on them to bring it forth. It needs to be a super majority, but it sure does. To me, 100% is just not realistic.
Let me ask you a quick question on the chart you've got, Carter. 100% approval, is that across the whole spectrum from a road that has 2 property owners versus 1,000 property owners? I mean, is that set for most of those cities as far as you know?
Any application that comes forward for any of those types of roads would be.
Okay. All right. Joe?
Carter, and you may not know this, Ken, you might be better suited to answer this question. I mean, we didn't set out, the city of Milton didn't set out to write an ordinance that was specific to road abandonment or was specific to percent approvals and things like that. We inherited those from some source. Is it fair to say that Johns Creek, Sandy Springs inherited those from the same source as we did?
Well, I think they're all based on the Fulton County standards.
Okay, so they were adopted based on Fulton County?
They were kind of as the base. Ours is a little bit different, and I think they are all slightly different. How they morphed into what we currently have, I don't know. But generally, everything that we have from a regulatory standpoint started with Fulton County.
And it's probably also fair to say that the percent approval probably had to do with the way the state law was written before, just to make sure anytime the city council made a determination or the county made a determination like that, the evidence to support their decision was overwhelmingly in their favor.
You wanted to minimize the risk of potential adverse parties.
Right, right. So it might also be fair to say that since the law's changed, nobody's really gone back to look at this. We're probably leading the charge there, I guess.
I don't know of any of the other communities that are evaluating any changes to their ordinances because of the state law change at this point.
Okay.
You know, one thing I'd say, and I'd like to also tell the audience that we've got here tonight, one thing we have all learned, if you can get 100% approval on something, then you're going to make somebody mad. Somebody's not going to be happy. You know, and we've had these issues come up before. My personal opinion is, number one is, as Ken has said, we have the power, or elected the people, citizens elected us to make the decisions we think are in the best interest of the city. And that being said, but also, my personal opinion on the 100% rule is it really doesn't give anybody any direction to make the best decisions in the interest of the city, because it is fairly impractical unless it's, you know, a subdivision of 10 or a road with 10 on it. But I, you know, also would like to see that the citizens, I don't want to, obviously if it's a glaring, this is the best direction for the city, the best interest of the city, I want to support that. But if it is, and you know, based on some of the cases we've heard before, but with this new change in law, you know, I would like for the citizens affected to be able to have the opportunity to make that decision, not us, or at least be part of that. So that being said, in a nutshell, I think we would, you know, 100% was something we probably ought to look at, even if it's, as we've discussed before, on a graded scale, to where if you have a smaller affected area, that you know, have a higher percentage, and as you get larger and larger, there may be different stepping where you step down the percentage. If, and again, that's if the majority of the council wants to look at that.
Mr. Mayor, to your point, I think you said be a part of the process, and of course, if Carter and I begin to look at possibly modifying the policy, I'll be the first to say this. The policy, any policy, would still, at the end of the day, have this council being the final decision maker with respect to what is the best interest. In other words, we would not abrogate that to a bunch of citizens who say, you submit an application, therefore you get your abandonment. At the end of the day, y'all will still need to make a finding that it's in the best interest, and retain your discretion to say, we appreciate you brought this to us, but between the input of staff and whatever, we can't support abandonment in this situation.
And again, my point was, you know, from the council perspective, I want to do what makes the most sense for the overall city, but I also, you know, want to have opportunity for the affected citizens to be a part of that decision. Obviously, we have the ultimate. So, Joe?
Yeah, I would follow on with that and agree with you, Ken, on your statement there. To me, it's much better to allow citizens to present this kind of decision to the council than it is keeping it away from being discussed at all. And so, I mean, again, with that in mind, I would say that the city should consider lowering the percent approval rate to something that's a little bit more reasonable. And I don't know if it's 66% or 75%. I forget what the difference between a supermajority and a major majority and things like that are. But I would be in favor of something that lowered the standard. And in addition, recognizing that, I forget what the actual percentage is. I think it's like 75% of Milton citizens live in a homeowners, in a subdivision that has a homeowners association coupled with it, I think that we ought to allow the homeowners association to play a role in that decision as well.
Understood.
Okay. Bill, thank you.
I would suspect that Fulton County developed this 100% provision back in the time period when the county was more rural. You probably only had 4 or 5 residences or parcels, property, personal, private property parcels on a road. And it's probably easier to get 100% of 10 or 5 than it would be now to get 100% of 640. I think that provision has outlived itself. Now that we've become more densely populated with larger communities on these roads, I'd certainly like to see us revisit that part of our ordinance. And I guess secondly, since the State House has taken it upon themselves to introduce this reversal, so to speak, of their previous ordinance here, there's got to be something more behind it than just the city of Milton up here. So there are other cases that have generated this legislation down there. So I think it's probably more of a popular movement to help out larger residential areas or more densely populated areas.
Anybody else?
I'm for looking at changing this 100% to make it something where at least a group could come and at least have the opportunity to present it to us. So I would support that.
Anybody else have a comment on that? It looks like, or I'd like to kind of just get a feel from council to give to staff if we would consider looking at or at changing this ordinance. I think, so Bert, you said, Joe, would you be interested? I would. Bill? Julie?
Yeah, I have a couple of
Okay,
questions.
yeah, we'll still, Karen, it looks like the majority would like to look at it, but we can continue discussing it. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Some of the questions, and I think that Carter, you and staff, when we last discussed this, some of the things that were talked about, and to the mayor's point, if this is going to be evaluated, I think we just need to make sure that staff is providing input, whether that be legal or just from a public works perspective. I believe that some of the things we talked about were that we needed to really understand what it meant, the affected citizenry. So I would think that as you guys look at this, obviously that is a definition that needs to be clear. Because obviously this could impact any and all roads within the city of Milton. It's obviously not, we wouldn't be looking to change this for a particular road. We're looking at this as a policy across the city. So I think in terms of affected citizen and what that means, I think that you would propose some different definitions when we last discussed this. I think that would be important. Also, there was the question of cost of abandonment and what that process is, so that as we look at this, I think some other things that were vague that maybe needed some more definition were that if a road were to be considered, what does that mean? Is that an asset of the city? If it is an asset of the city, how do you evaluate that asset so that we, again, bring clarity to the issue so that we, if there are question marks in terms of what that would be, that this would be the time, I think, to address those, at least reflecting back on what staff had recommended when we last talked about it. And then the other, I think, again, the issue of making sure that when we look at the policy that we're thinking about any of those unintended consequences for roads that we have not been brought to our attention. Is that what sorts of things do you want to look at? Do you want to look at specific types of roads? The scenarios that you mentioned, are there some roads where that would or would not be a consideration? And then also to Councilmember Lusk's point, maybe staff could let us know when Fulton County had last updated it. I think they actually had updated, I want to say 2006 or 2007. But if staff could just let us know that, so at least we understand the basis of when that had been changed.
And I'll just say, Councilman Rosato Bailey, before this law changed, it's no mistake or accident all those other jurisdictions were 100%.
Right.
just because everyone was a little concerned to do it without that sort of money.
But again, I think the main thing is that if we go about, not if, but if, when we go down this road of evaluating that, is that it's, to me, it's much more than just the percentage of approval. It's how do you define affected citizens? How do you make sure that we really have defined up front what the cost would be, who would bear those costs, just so that everybody's got the same playbook in front of them when they start to evaluate this, whether it be an HOA or a rural road.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody else? Joe.
One follow-up. I mean, do we contemplate any of those things in the policy, in the ordinance today or the law today in terms of costs of abandonment? I mean, because I think Councilmember Bailey brings up a good point. I mean, we should be considering what it means to be affected, because, you know, we're talking about the percentage of affected citizens, so we need to understand what that is. But dragging economics and finance into this, I don't know if that's the right thing to do. That I'm not saying we don't have to discuss that, but that may be something that the council discusses on their own, and we don't have to write a specific hardline policy into the law.
That would be, if we're going to adopt a new policy, those sorts of costs would be sort of put into the pot of a lot of your general considerations, because that to me goes into the best interest of the public. So that's where Carter would let's say you get an application under some new policy, so a homeowners group sends you an application, you look at it, staff looks at it, and they come to you and say, you know, the appropriate percentage buy-in has been met, but here's staff's concern about this one. And that's where they're going to go through those intangibles. And then you can sort of do a best interest analysis. And you can say, look, the cost is just too great here from the standpoint of traffic flow and safety and this and that. That would be part of this policy. Absolutely.
And if I can just address Councilmember Longoria's point, is that there historically, back when we were still an unincorporated community, there had been some abandonments that had been brought forward. And in those discussions, again, it was with the auspices of Fulton County, but that there were discussions about cost. And that's one reason I reflect on that, is that the more defined it can be up front, so that we don't leave those questions unanswered, whether it's a general caveat to capture those various considerations. But there was some language that had been adopted, and I don't know if that's still part of our specific language, but that indicated that if there was an abandonment, certain things would have to be borne by those that were making the petition. Wood Road is an example, because when that was identified historically, there was a lot of discussion around that, who was going to bear the cost of the potential closure, and then also who was going to bear the cost of the speed humps that ultimately got put in place. So again, without consideration of a particular roadway, there are instances when that had been an issue for citizens, and so I just, again, I don't have an opinion as to who should bear the cost, but it's a question mark that if we're going to evaluate it, I think we owe it to ourselves to at least understand what is the criteria. Either there's going to be a cost, there's not one, the city will absorb it or not. But I think to leave it as an unanswered question mark would just be a missed opportunity for us to bring clarity.
Yeah, and I guess in the 13 months I've been on the council, we voted on 2 pieces of road abandonment. One was sort of a no-brainer because it was a little bitty, strip of road that nobody used. It was behind the service station. The other was a cul-de-sac. And in either case, we brought up costs or anything else similar to that.
And can I address that very quickly? And I think that's what's going to make this an interesting exercise, is that historically, since you've had to make a finding of basically the road is almost not used anymore, such that it serves no substantial public purpose, that you've really had sort of an easy equation to walk through, because you've not had a lot of traffic. It's almost been the rule. There's not been a lot of traffic. That's why we can abandon. Here, though, with this new law, you're suddenly faced with the situation of literally being to abandon heavily used roads. And so then all of a sudden the issue was, well, who is going to pay to maintain it? That suddenly takes on new resonance now, because we got to, is there going to be a bond filed or a letter of credit on file with the city, or how is that going to happen exactly? So, because what we don't want to happen is abandon a road, and then it gets into disrepair, although heavily used, and then you come back with a big public works project of now a pothole.
Right.
You understand.
And this is a very complex issue. Again, I think it looks like the council would like to move forward looking at this. But again, that's not an easy task. So I'm going to say that we're going to have to heavily rely on our staff working with our city attorney to come up with some suggestions for us. And, again, as to all the questions that have been asked tonight, it's not something we can take lightly. So I guess by saying that means, we'd like to ask staff to work on it, but, I'd like to ask you to consider all the options and give us the
Well, this
best
will be
direction.
fantastic, Mr. Mayor. I can use this as a template from all my other jurisdictions.
Yeah,
and
once
take
we
it to
do
them.
So in other words, we have no cost for you to do this
I
evaluation?
thought you'd go there.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that, for the record.
Can I just say as we close this one that obviously if we all want to look at it, we'll look at it. The thing I have a hard time doing, one of these days I'm going to figure it out. When I do, I'll let you know how I do it. But one of these days I'm going to figure out how to read minds. I don't have that yet. So, we've talked about, we want to look at it. The percentage is probably too high. If individually you all have some ideas as to what you're thinking, obviously we've got to provide something to you that at least 4 of you can live with, and I'd like all 7 of you to be able to live with it. I mean, that's our goal. So, even if it's individually, if you have something in here that you're thinking is the perfect fit, shoot it to me as we start to evaluate this, because right now we're kind of opening up a book and we don't really know what the story is going to be. So, if you have those, send them to me. I'd appreciate it.
Okay, that makes sense, everybody. Julie?
Just one other footnote, and this goes back to Councilmember Longoria's point, is that just another road that staff may want to go back and look at when there was discussion on the council was, I think it was Black Oak Road. Black Oak Road, and that was one, Joe, where there had been discussion about cost because it was a road that was utilized by citizens, and that particular developer was wanting us to abandon that road and that they were going to take ownership. And so we had a lot of citizens that came and said, gee, if you're going to abandon a road, please don't just give away an asset that was the city's. And so that, again, kind of different scenario that had come before us is part of what and why staff had started to look at what sort of approaches do you manage when it comes to something that citizens view as an asset. So anyway, it's just another example when we had talked about it historically.
Okay. Yeah. So to kind of close this one out, if everybody on the council could, if you have any specific thoughts, or something in your mind, shoot it to Chris. Chris can go over it with staff and legal and come up with some recommendations for us to look at.
I just don't want to leave an item kind of out there, and I'll just, if y'all are good with that, let's move forward with this evaluation. Let's put ourselves out to manage the expectations somewhere about 3 months. We'll come back and talk about it again, so about 90 days. So that sticks us into middle of May.
Okay. Everybody good with that?
So can you capture that just out to the May work session? Great. Okay.
All right. Move on to our next presentation. This Lynn wants to start, or Robin?
High-intensity use buffers and undesirable uses discussion. Ms. Lynn Tully.
As you all may remember, this is a continuation of a discussion from several months ago, wherein we were looking at kind of this somewhat standard condition 1A that has been placed on several different commercial zonings that have happened since you all have been a city. In going through that list, again, I pulled several different approved commercial rezonings. And in going through that list, they were pretty much similar. There were some changes from zoning for some specific sites, but they were pretty well standard. That list appeared, however, for the exclusions to carry a few themes. Those themes are items or uses which were just generally objectionable, and uses which seem to have kind of a more, what we deemed a high-intensity type use. When I went through those, I looked at one of the things that you all asked me to do is look at some of the other jurisdictions. I've looked at a lot of the other jurisdictions, and as well as jurisdictions throughout the country. And it appears that there really is not a lot of consistency among so many of those uses. What there is some consistency on are those that are kind of generally accepted as objectionable, quote-unquote, uses. But there really is not a lot of consistency there. So what I've tried to do here is, on this front page that you see, you'll see 2 pages with a list of uses, and some of them are highlighted. Okay, those uses on the last 2 columns are the permitted uses currently allowable in C1, and in the very last column, those permitted uses that are allowable in C2. And if any of you are familiar with zonings, under Euclidean zoning, that means that anything in C1 is also allowable. So that's what you've got here. All those items that are highlighted in yellow are items that have been included as have been specifically excluded in this zoning condition 1A somewhere in one of our zonings. So like I said, anything that's highlighted is something that's been specifically excluded from a zoning in that condition. So that gives you kind of an idea of where I started. When we're looking at trying to define what is our high-intensity use, we've still had a very difficult time. What I tended to fall back into in discussing this with some of the other planners too, trying to get a kind of a general, what do you think is high intensity, is they would fall into 2 categories. One is the category of these things create more traffic, significantly more traffic. And then the other category was those things which are typically incompatible, adjoining what is predominantly our residential uses. Okay? So, and that incompatibility can stem from safety, it can stem from aesthetics, it can stem from simply the type of use. But those were kind of the 2 categories that they tended to fall into. So, well, how do we regulate those then? In this case, where would be an appropriate use for these somewhat high-intensity uses under those 2 definitions? One, I felt, well, if it were a matter primarily of traffic generation, then those uses which create this kind of increased traffic should not be clustered there together. They should be separated, and thereby reducing the amount of traffic. So I looked at, okay, well, clustering with some buffers between these existing uses. Number 2, the items which are generally incompatible with our other uses, I felt, well, we do have a higher commercial zoning district. We don't use it very often. That's our C2 zoning district. And so we could reclassify many of those into the C2 zoning district. So what I've prepared for you on this white sheet is kind of our staff recommended changes that would address all those highlighted uses, either in one of those 2 categories, either, like I said, leaving them alone, moving them to a C2 permitted uses section, or removing them entirely as an objectionable use, or including them as a use with a kind of a clustering buffer. Okay. So that's kind of where we are. Let me go through these maps really quickly so you have an idea of the properties that this would affect. The first map that you have includes all the parcels which are currently zoned C2. As you can see, there aren't that many. They're located primarily along Highway 9. They are all developed to some degree. Now, I'll say that the 2 northernmost properties on Highway 9, one is substantially developed, but not completely developed. It's the strip center. And the other is includes an old home just outside of 5 acres subdivision. That home potentially could be redeveloped into something else. But like I said, basically these are all already developed in one form or another. The second parcel map, again, looks at this clustering buffer. So if, for instance, we took all the gas stations and fast food restaurants all have have to tell you, were the two that jumped out as highly traffic generating. And primarily it's convenience traffic. So it's traffic that just, as you're going by, they decide they need something, or rarely do they go directly to the gas station. Anyway, so in looking at these gas stations and putting a half-mile buffer and a 1 mile buffer between the existing use gas stations, you can see the half-mile buffer in kind of the blue dotted line, and then the 1 mile in the red dotted line. You can see that this takes up the majority of those parcels that were, as you might remember this map, those red parcels are the parcels that were unconditional or had very few conditions, none of which would eliminate gas stations. With a clustering buffer, this would contain the majority of those along Highway 9. You'll notice that I included the gas station that's currently permitted for Bethany Bend and Highway 9, as well as the majority of Crabapple area and Birmingham area. There are some other properties along Arnold Mill that would be available for gas station uses, and then some scattered throughout the city, which are, again, if you remember our analysis from before, those scattered parcels tend to be very small. And once you apply the commercial and against residential buffers, they become very, very small. And so they would be difficult to develop, I would say, in the least. And then the next page, similarly, we've done this with fast food restaurants, which have similar conditions. And as you can see, it leaves areas of Crabapple, Birmingham alone. Those would be available if it were approved, as well as some areas along Arnold Mill. If we choose to adopt these clustering buffers, I would remind council that there are still opportunities to allow and attach conditions to any rezonings in those areas. So there's still many opportunities for you to condition these things to get what you're really after. But this would be a start to that. Are there any questions on the maps before we kind of look at the table in depth?
Julie?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mayor. Lynn, thank you. This is always helpful to have data. On the C2, and just thinking about Chadwick's landfill, is Chadwick's landfill not a C2?
Thank you, Robin. It's a use permit separately, so
Okay.
it's not a C2.
And it might just so that one day when we circulate these, or if we put them out on the web, maybe we could just even make a notation, because my guess is we're going to get a lot of people that live over in that area saying, but what about Chadwick's?
Mm-hmm.
If we can just note that it's a use permit with it has a defined time frame, doesn't it, until it's full?
Well, and what we've tried to denote on these maps is that are these areas that are available for development too, so that's really not, obviously
Okay.
not available for
I'm just trying to anticipate that question so that people don't think that we didn't identify it. And then another question, just on a different map. On the one that says currently permitted for convenience store stations.
Yes.
And I'll just use as an example on Lackey Road. So that's an existing parcel that was zoned specifically with an unconditional C1? Or was that the 20 acres that was a conditional nursery way back when that then never was developed and went away?
I don't know if it's was originally rezoned for a nursery.
Because it was a conditional C1 that was conditioned, and then nothing transpired, so it actually reverted or should have reverted back to original AG1.
Yeah, I'll have to research that one
Okay.
specifically.
So that was just a specific, it's at Lackey and 140, and I'm thinking that may be going back to.
No, it's still there. In fact, it did not.
It should have reverted, because back at and we can talk about
Well,
that.
it did not. It actually didn't. I've looked at the case because the woman or the person who owned it ended up doing another type of business, and so I have the records that.
We may be talking about two different parcels, so we can talk about it after the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, thank you. So in looking at the recommended changes, what we're looking at are moving some of these items. Some of these items, again, are currently shown in C2, although we have mentioned them in C1 as being specifically excluded. But what we would do then would be to move barbershop and beauty salons, those that are standalone, to a C2 district, which is a higher, kind of a higher zoning district. In fact, our highest commercial zoning district. Moving coin-operated laundromats as permitted from C1 into C2 only. Adding commercial amusements, both indoor and outdoor. And we added indoor and outdoor because commercial amusements seem to be listed specifically in C2, but the definition for those in our zoning ordinance is separated by indoor and outdoor. So it's kind of a caveat, but I wanted to be sure that you all knew that.
So Lynn, are you suggesting that that would then move, that both would remain in C2, or they'd only be allowed in C2?
They would only be allowed in C2.
Okay.
Escort dating services, that's something that I added, is not necessarily something that you all
Where is
brought
your
up.
mind?
But in looking through these other ordinances,
I don't
that came
recall
up as
having
one
a
of the
zoning
things
case
they
like
looked
that.
into, so I thought I should at least mention it. Y'all don't want to, that's fine, but.
Are those legal?
Subject to the intensity.
Okay. Maybe you can give us some more information at a work session. Thank you.
I don't know that I want any additional information.
Okay, let's move on.
Moving on.
Flea market and secondhand stores, and that would include, just so that you all know, that would include these We Buy Gold stores as well as any pawn shops and things of that nature, and just moving those directly to a C2 permitted use. Fortune tellers is one that has been mentioned in many areas. I have found that these are types of uses that are objectionable to cities, and if you also choose, we can just eliminate those as being permitted throughout.
Let me ask a legal question on that. Again, may not want any fortune tellers, but legally, can we restrict a use totally?
Typically, where you
Illegal
get into
use?
issues is when you run into, like, for instance, federally protected rights or even rights protected by the state constitution. Thus, we have gotten into, obviously debating here with respect to adult entertainment and those sorts of things, which have some marginal or peripheral First Amendment protections. But depending upon the use, for instance, like the escort dating services, I'm not aware of any sort of constitutional or federal protection that they have. I think we got the same discussion when we started about gas stations in the not too distant past about whether or not we could, if we wanted to, prohibit gas stations. So the answer is you're going to have a lot of discretion with respect to these sorts of land use decisions, and the answer is probably yes, Mr. Mayor.
So you're saying that we could move the escort dating services, instead of moving it to C2, we can put it as completely objectionable?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Big blue arrow on my sheet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like to borrow my highlighter?
The red one.
It just got moved on my sheet, too, in case you didn't know.
Yeah. Karen and I are sharing the same yellow
All right.
marker.
Okay.
All right. The freestanding fast food restaurants, I would recommend to include a clustering buffer. And again, I use half a mile and a mile determination as simply a visual aid to help you understand and see, what this really looks like on potentially developable lands. That distance can be set by you all. As I mentioned before, there is not a consistent buffer that I could find amongst our sister cities or even kind of throughout the country. So, moving on to the next page, gas stations, very same argument. I left hotel in C1. I think that maybe had been an exception, an exclusion specifically for a certain site for a certain purpose. So I left that in C1. Laundromats, similarly to the coin-operated laundries, moved those to C2. Liquor sales and package stores, we could move those to C2. I would caveat that by saying, just as Ken mentioned, adult business, entertainment, and liquor stores kind of have their own ordinances which regulate their placement and characteristics. So we may want to just leave those alone and allow those ordinances to prevail in those locations. Yes, sir.
Aren't liquor stores, I think you just started to touch on it, regulated by the state as far as proximity to one another?
The minimums, the minimum distances are, but the localities are left for the jurisdictions to increase and go quite above and beyond what the state requires.
Massage parlors stand alone. We can remove those entirely. We can regulate those by definition, basically requiring that they have their own certification or be amongst a practice of certified professionals, which would include doctors. And again, like I said, that's the final option, I guess, is to regulate them by definition. I will say that a lot of the uses that are included in here, we would have to either create definitions or revamp some of the definitions to be sure that we are inclusive enough in our zoning ordinance. Moving on down, motel. Again, I think this was one that was specific to a certain site. Pawn shops are taken care of in the current C2 permitted uses. I think that we can allow those to remain there. Pool halls is one that I have seen as fairly objectionable in other cities pretty consistently. The definition for that is a little sporadic, so this is one of those where we'd have to write the definition pretty tightly unless we, feel like there might be some that we want to keep or allow in. So.
And that one would be one I would think you
I'm sorry,
would
sir?
have. That one would be one I think you would have to have a specific description or definition, because does that mean a restaurant or bar that has a pool table, or does that mean a facility that just has pool tables and nothing else?
I think we'd have to look at the square footage in comparison to the overall restaurant or facility. Recycling center, these are the collection areas for recycling. We could move those to C2 if they are something that we feel is maybe too intense of a use. And then roadside vending. And when I speak about roadside vending, I'm not talking about a produce stand or something like that. I'm talking about the Velvet Elvis, the rugs, the humongous teddy bears and chairs and furniture and things that appear on the sides of the roads. If this is something that we just don't want to see in our commercial districts, we just need to say we don't want to see these in our commercial districts.
Is there any legal?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing within the auspices of your police power you can regulate.
Okay.
And you could word it such that produce stands and all would still be allowed?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And particularly those are specific to agricultural uses, farmers markets, things of that nature. Almost at the end, tattoo, piercing, and body artists. These are, again, this is not one that was necessarily on your list. However, I've noticed it on several and very highly and closely regulated both by the health department as well as zoning. And if it's something that we would seem to deem objectionable completely, we can move it to that side or to one of the higher commercial uses. So, something to consider. And then, last but not least, video arcades. And I think that we're not necessarily talking about Chuck E. Cheese, but those types of things might be allowable. Dave & Buster's might be allowable, although they have a good bit of restaurant facility use as well. Might be allowable in a C2 versus a C1 district.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Bill, you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Back on page 1, amusement, indoor only. Where would you categorize an amusement park?
It would be an outdoor commercial amusement.
And where is that included here?
It's not, and that's why we added the indoor and outdoor caveat there. And it would be, what we're suggesting is that we would move it to C2. The closest related use that's listed is outdoor batting cages. It includes outdoor batting cages in our current ordinance.
Now, how about a carnival?
Again, those aren't specifically listed. And so they would be allowable as a special event or have been, but this would eliminate that allowance in commercial districts unless it were in a C2 district.
So do they have to get a special event permit to come in to?
Yes. Any other questions?
I have a quick question, and this goes back to when we had all discussed the difference between convenience store, gas station, et cetera. And on page 1, just under garage, automobile repair, painting, body repair, et cetera, it seems to me, Lynn, that you had looked at other jurisdictions, as I know you're doing with this as well. Was that one that in some cases ended up in a C2 versus a C1? Just because the definition can be so broad?
It could. When I was looking at the other jurisdictions, I did not necessarily notice whether or not they were in a higher category of commercial zoning district specifically. For instance, a tire store versus, or a tire and lube store, a handy lube versus a full service repair. I didn't really look at it for that. But again, as we rework these definitions, that could be something that we consider.
And so I just bring that up because I know that we heard from a lot of citizens that were concerned with perhaps the lack of clarity that some of our zoning provided with regards to gas station versus convenience store versus a repair sort of center, especially when it starts to have high numbers of vehicles that are just parked outdoors. And again, it's good business and we need those things, but just thinking about where's the appropriate zoning. So if that could be one that maybe you just take a little bit of additional view of.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you.
This will have to still go back to the planning commission before it gets to you all. So if you've got any other questions or concerns, please let me know.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Chris, staff-wise?
No, not tonight. No, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it was a very productive meeting, and glad we combined the two and give staff a night off next week. And for our visitors, you didn't have to stay till 10 or 11 tonight.
But you're welcome to stay.
You're welcome to. So, that being said, I would like to open the floor for a motion and second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That concludes this meeting.
Yeah.